2.5 market equilibrium and aggregate supply shocks. To begin with, once again, let us suppose we start with the long-run equilibrium. Price level, GDP, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and the long run aggregate supply curve. My initial price level, initial short-run GDP, also equal to my potential GDP, and let's call this point A. Let us suppose the price of crude oil increases, and crude oil can be used to make gasoline, a main input for a lot of firms, and a lot of the byproducts of crude oil can be made into, for example, plastic, and so on. An increase in the price of oil increases the production costs for most of the firms. Right away we can tell, because this is on the cost side, this will shift the supply or aggregate supply, and this will shift from A as 0. Are we shifting up or shifting down? An increase in the production costs implies that the firms will not be able to produce as much. This means the output, Y0, should go to, for example, Y1 on impact. We are moving closer to the origin. The firms produce less, therefore Y1 is closer to the origin. This means the aggregate supply curve will shift, for example, to this particular point. So A as 0 will shift to A as 1. And let us call this point B. What would happen to the price level? As the production costs for the firms increase, most likely the firms would pass on some of this production cost increase to the consumers. Therefore, very likely they're going to raise the price. And we can also tell graphically the price level increases from A to B, or P0 to P1. Short-run output decreases from Y0 to Y1. So short-run actual Y decreases from Y0 to Y1. And why is that the case? Let's suppose the firms have to pay twice as much for gasoline. What are the firms going to do? They cannot afford to keep as many workers as before. As a result, they have to scale down the production. So Y0 goes to Y1. What kind of output gap is this? So by definition, output gap is the new Y minus my initial Y, which is my potential GDP, divided by new minus old, divided by the old, times 100 if we want to look at percentage. This, as we can see graphically, will be less than 0. Now the question is this an inflationary gap or is this a recessionary gap? We do see the price increasing. We do see GDP dropping. So is it the price change that would determine this is an inflationary gap, or the GDP change that would tell us this is a recessionary gap? We always focus on GDP changes. So in this case, even though the price level is higher, we say that we have a recession. This is an recessionary gap. Actual unemployment versus the natural rate, which is around 6 to 7-ish% for Canada. Because firms are now laying off some workers, because production costs have increased dramatically because of increase in the price of gasoline. They have to lay off some workers, therefore unemployment rate will be higher because it is recessionary. And we can tell it is higher because output is lower. How does the economy adjust from the short run B back to the long run, say, C? At point B, we know that this is recessionary, so unemployment rate has gone up, much harder to find jobs, And because there's an excess supply of workers, because unemployment rate is higher, therefore workers will be okay, maybe grudgingly, agree to a drop in the wage rate. They will be happy just to get a job. If that is the case, this would mean the reason why AS shifted in the first place was increase in the price of oil. Now workers find it much harder to get jobs. They're willing to actually work for a lower wage. We would go from point B, start to return to point A. And why is that? Because wages, which is also part of the firm's production costs, start to fall. When would this stop? Only when we go back to point A. So this is also point C. And let us call this AS2, which is the same as AS0. So eventually, there's no change in GDP, and there's no change in the price level either. The economy will adjust in this case. Wages will change opposite compared to the change in the direction of the price of oil. Of course, if you're wondering, B going back to C may take a very long time. Workers would suffer because of the wage decrease and because of the unemployment. Can the government or the central bank do something and not wait for B to slowly go back to C? So, alternative. What if the government doesn't want to see the economy sitting at B for too long? It tries to increase government expenditure or cut taxes and bring this from A to, say, D very quickly. This is possible. So to go from B to D, you can increase government expenditure and or cut taxes, increase argue demand. This is certainly possible, but D itself, remember, would also create problems because what this would mean is the price level would increase even further. The first increase in the price is due to increase in the price of oil. The second one is because of the increase in demand. This would raise inflation rates, maybe even to double digits. This certainly could work. However, besides this as being one problem, a second problem, if you increase government expenditure and or cutting taxes at the same time, this would also mean government deficits or debts would also tend to worsen. So what should we do? Should we let the economy recover by itself, go from A to B and back to C? Or should we go from A to B and then directly to D? Is a judgment call. If we go from B to C, we don't have to go through higher inflation rates or more government deficit, but we could have a prolonged, very slow process, prolonged recession from B back to C. If we go from B to D, we could prevent this recession. However, we create one problem and two problems. As an exercise, also try for yourself on a separate piece of paper. The initial shock is aggregate supply shifting. Rather than to the left, now it shifts to the right. And this could be caused by a drop in wages or the opposite, a fall in the price of oil.